Hi, I'm Christina. Welcome to the Revolver Fan First podcast, where we go deep with artists into their history as a fan, because all artists were fans first. Here we have John Petrucci of Dream Theater, Liquid Attention Experiment, a solo artist in his own right. How are you going, John?
Doing well. How are you?
Yes.
I love that. I only hear that expression in Australia. How are you going? It's like a combination of where are you going and how are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. We don't know. It's a question.
Right. So I never know how to respond. I don't know if I should say by car, by plane, I'm going.
Anything could happen. So the whole premise of this show is sort of going back to the beginning. What was the first band or artist or song or record that you first fell in love with?
Right. Well, for me, I grew up on Long Island in New York, and we had a rock radio station that played, all classic rock and actually things that really weren't classic at the time. They were new, and actually one of them was AC/DC. And in that era when the Black Album came out and Zeppelin and bands like Boston and just all the stuff that was kind of being played on the New York rock radio on Long Island, actually had a big influence on me as a kid. And I started playing guitar when I was 12.
Yeah.
So, that was kind of the first music I started to kind of listen to and try to learn, and even things like Iron Maiden and Def Leppard and stuff like that.
Well, more than a feeling, like it takes like a minute and a half for the vocal to kick in. I feel like you've taken a leaf out of their book. I don't care what this intro is. I don't give a shit. I'm just
exactly. Yeah, Dream Theater songs. Yeah. We don't follow any rules in that regard. And, especially when I started to listen to Rush and Yes and more of the Prog, you can tell a whole musical story before the vocalist even comes in.
Totally. Was that carry on.
No, and what's interesting about Boston, just as an aside, when I was a young guitar player, and the same thing goes with trying to learn Zeppelin solos and Jimmy Page, stuff like that. I didn't know how the stuff was done. Yeah. And I remember with Boston specifically, Tom Schultz did a lot of guitar layering, harmonies and things. And as you're a kid, you got to go back to when there was no YouTube and everything else. And you literally have a record, and I'm putting the needle on trying to learn. I didn't know how to get that sound on the guitar. So there was all this discovery. And when you finally realize, oh, that's what it was, that's how he's doing it, you had these big aha moments. But at the time, it was just so mysterious.
That's awesome. Well, you kind of get to have a process that we don't get in a time where it's almost, there is a certain monoculture, but there's also all these cultural kind of things that you exist in. Was this something you shared with your mates, or was this, because I think it's like the 70s and 80s and stuff, like it's a really interesting time, like not someone who was around at that time or whatever, but you got like rock and roll in the 70s and like the big psychedelic kind of stuff, and then you got punk rock. Was it tribal? Like, were you guys the kind of, because I know Al Jorgensen came on the show and he's like, I used to be a 70s guy and get beaten up. I'd go to a punk show and get beaten up because I had the long hair and all that kind of stuff. Was there any kind of, did you feel tribal about what you were into, or?
Oh, definitely. In fact, the other thing about where I grew up, and this actually turned into, the beginnings of Dream Theater, but I know not everybody has this experience, but there were a lot of musicians in my town.
Yeah.
Like there were so many bands. There were literally, I could go jam with my friends who were into like the Dead, and we would do these, ridiculously long songs, jams, and play to Hendrix and the Dead. Then I'd go to another friend's house, and they were all into like metal and the Scorpions and stuff like that. And then me and John Mayung, who's in Dream Theater, and we grew up together. I mean, we would jam on Iron Maiden and Metallica and Rush, and there were just dozens and dozens of bands, and that had a great big influence. So when we really got into a band, let's just say it was Rush, and they were coming to town and they were playing in New York, it was totally tribal. Yeah, we would all just get together and go, and there was it's funny because in the way now where information is just out there immediately, like if music comes out and you can literally within seconds see what somebody's opinion is of a song that you release or whatever. Back then it's so funny because it would just be us like hanging out in a place that we called the Sump, which was like this sort of dry sump thing that kids shouldn't be hanging out at, you know, drinking beers and like talking about the new Rush album, whether we liked it or not. And those conversations stayed, you know, they didn't go any further than the five of us who were hanging out.
Yeah.
You know, now fast forward to today, and one comment by one person is seen by everybody everywhere. So it's just so different.
Is it better?
In some ways it is, in some ways it isn't. Some of those conversations and experiences, and even as a musician playing live on stage or seeing a show, you know, those are moments in time that just existed right then and there. And, you know, they're not things that were relived over and over and over and over and over ad nauseum. And sometimes there are things that you just, you know, become just too public, you know. Those discussions, you know, they were kind of more just between your group of friends, and then all of a sudden it becomes like this highly opinionated society. So it's a little weird.
Progressive rock's a bit eternal as well. It kind of seems to transcend like genres and and movements and big things. Like, you know, you guys had your first big song moment with like Pull Me Under around the time like the Nirvana era and grunge and all that stuff. What were you guys listening to as all these things broke? Like, were you into them or? Like, were you? Did you smash Nirvana? Were you a Soundgarden guy? Like, just out of interest?
Absolutely. I liked all that. I liked Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Nirvana. Absolutely. We were definitely, you know, into whatever was happening at the time. As long as it was good music, we were into it. You know, it's so funny the way that happens with music, you know, because the style and the sound of bands from certain eras just becomes so like time stamped sometimes, but it doesn't mean that it's good or bad. It's just like your opinion and your experience with it. And there's a lot of 70s, 80s, 90s music that I love. And we were right, even though we were playing prog metal, even though prog metal at the time wasn't a thing when we started. You know, it is now, but to us it was just this weird music we were playing. You know, it didn't mean that we weren't still listening to U2 and Nirvana and whatever bands were happening. Absolutely. We weren't like we weren't like elitists about, you know.
No, but grown people will continue to gently weep and quietly headbang to prog forever, and that's a beautiful thing.
It's very cool.
What was the soundtrack to you kind of working? Okay, what was the first music you listened to that you couldn't get into? You were like, nah, this isn't my thing. Well, where did you draw the line? What was something? Because people who are obsessed with music, I think they have strong feelings about this stuff.
Right. That I couldn't get into. Let me think about that for a second.
He's just into everything. That's great.
No, I wouldn't say I was into everything. You know, I was definitely, especially as I started to get more into guitar playing, I gravitated more towards, you know, guitar music. So, you know, not only bands, but then it kind of went on to just guitar players like Alan Holdsworth and Al Di Meola and stuff like that. I couldn't really wrap my head around like the super poppy 80s glam stuff. Like I wasn't a fan of that.
Right, is it?
Know? But when I go back and I listen to, if I hear some of that stuff on the radio now or whatever, I'm like, this is like not that bad. It's not as bad as I remember it. You know what I mean? But it was more of a stylistic thing that I wasn't into. You know, that was more. I mean, I think there will always be bands of different levels of musicianship, and it's like I really don't think that it's right to be judgmental of people's playing abilities, because it's like it's all music, we all enjoy it, and all different styles of music have different levels of technicality. But so it's not so much that, in that it was just the song. I guess it was more the songs. Like it was too, like, I don't know, too bubblegummy to me. I couldn't get into it. Well, like it wasn't intense enough.
Well, you've got, you know, the stuff that you've kind of spoken about. There's a lot of depth to it. Was the artistic and the visual and the conceptual? I mean, obviously you've incorporated an enormous amount of that stuff throughout your career. What kind of records really struck you in terms of the visual stuff? And I know back then you would have had like vinyl, you know, the art, and it was another level of stuff. What kind of struck you about that kind of stuff? And you're an artist as well as a kid, yeah? You like did
I,
painting, drawing and stuff. And
I was, yeah, that was the first thing I got into as a kid, as I was into drawing and painting, and kind of like moved away from that and got into music. But I would love, you know, all the bands that I was into had unbelievable packaging, and like we mentioned before, Rush and Hugh Syme, who we've worked with numerous times, and who did the latest Dream Theater album cover. So all the Rush album covers and packaging, same with Iron Maiden, same with Yes. I used to love just kind of really diving into those worlds. And it was the other thing about it is that when you'd go to see one of those bands live, and this is something Dream Theater has tried to do as well, is that you're all of a sudden walking into that world as like an environment. So they've taken, bands like Iron Maiden and Rush just have done this so well theatrically, where they've taken the theme of a record, and you walk into the venue and all of a sudden there's that world, and they make it come to life, and you're sort of transported. And we try to do the same thing, stealing a page from that book.
yeah.
I think it all goes hand in hand: art, music, visual, and audio, for sure. It's all about the experience. Yeah.
And you got even like Nico McBrain has his sooty doll on his drum kit, which is thematically matched to the record. There's the little details that make the difference, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
It's so good. What was the soundtrack to your first Heartbreak? Was there a record? Was there a record that was the soundtrack to that?
You know what? It probably was, Journey or something like that. Journey, Escape, or something like that. Yeah. It's just like that music was so awesome, and just like the perfect music to be sad to when you had to.
Yeah.
When you needed it. Yeah.
Did you kind of find yourself as what were you listening to when you were kind of finding who you are as a person? Like, did you define yourself as a guitar player young? Like, did you kind of go, this is who I am? Yeah.
You know what? I did. I really did. I started playing when I was 12, and it kind of just grabbed me. And before long, I would be playing guitar all day long, 6 hours a day. And just like, it wasn't, I was pretty young, probably 14, 15, when I realized, like, this is all I want to do. Like, I'm going to do this with my life. And, I would even look to the bands that I was into and just think, what do I have to do to kind of make that happen for myself?
Yeah.
And I think because of the kind of bands I was into, we mentioned Iron Maiden, Rush, things like that, because of their whole level of the way that they are with their fans, the way that, not necessarily with Rush, but with a band like Iron Maiden, the way that they toured so internationally and had such a global presence. It's just, I looked up to that so much and just wanted to do that. And it kind of like just set the tone, like it gave me a direction.
Did it feel accessible? Did it feel possible? Were you just like, it's just between me and practicing this hard every day, I will get to the other side of it? Or you're like, I don't even know if I'm ever going to get here?
No, I was stubbornly single-minded. Like, I was totally had blinders on. Like, there's no way I'm doing anything else. And I've said this before. And so funny, when I was going to at a high school, going into college and looking at colleges, I really wanted to go to Berklee College of Music and pursue music, because that's where Al Di Meola went, and Steve Vai, and guys I looked up to. And I remember, my father was really not crazy about that idea. And he would say to me, you really need something to fall back on. And I just remember being like, stubborn teenager, like, I am not falling back on anything. I'm full speed ahead. So fortunately it worked out.
That is, that's one thing Lemmy once told me. I'm like, what's the Motorhead way? It's dogged persistence in the face of mounting evidence to the contrary, which I think is a good attitude to be a musician and to survive in this strange world.
Absolutely. It's a great attitude. And it's interesting also, choosing the style of music that Dream Theater plays, that I play, this progressive style of, it's you're just, by the nature of the music you play, you're already swimming upstream against the current. You're not, it's like, we're not trying to write 3-minute hit songs. We're literally doing everything the opposite of what you're supposed to do, writing 20-minute songs and with long solos and everything. And somehow it worked out, because my mentality, and this might sound funny, but I always thought, classical music existed for so long, and was such a popular form of music, and still is, and people still go to see classical concerts and symphonies, and those are long pieces of music with multiple movements, with lots of technical playing and emotional sections, and it's like there is an audience for that.
Totally.
Maybe just because it's wrapped in the package of metal or hard rock, what's the difference? It's kind of, it's sort of eliciting the same kind of emotional connection.
Totally.
So that was my thought. Like, there's definitely an audience for this out there. I know there is.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's it's tribal again. You knew that there was guys out there who felt the same way, and I guess, and meeting the guys you found at Dream Theater would have been, what did you guys agree on when you met, like you and Mike, and like what did you agree on when you first met?
Well, it's funny, like I said before, John and I grew up together, and went to high school together, and then went to Berkeley, met Mike there. And our original keyboard player, Kevin Moore, too, was one of my best friends. He was my best friend growing up. And we all agreed on the music that we liked. We were just such huge fans of the bands that we liked.
Yeah.
We were just like ridiculous Rush fans, and we loved Pink Floyd and Roger Waters and all that. And when we met Mike, who was also a Long Islander, but he lived about an hour from us in New York. He liked the same music that we liked. So that was the first sort of connection, was just like, oh, you're a Rush fan, you're a Maiden fan, and it brought us together.
Yeah. Just on a side, what was it like getting back together with him, like for your solo album, Liquid Tension Experiment? Like, what was it like, kind of, do you guys feel like your kids again? Is it weird to kind of come back after a long time? I know, obviously you had a lot of time apart, and it was actually a lot of fun. We've been friends since we're 18 years old.
Yeah. And even though for the past 10 or so years we haven't been in a band together, we've still been friends. And our families are very tight, and our kids all grew up together, and our wives were actually in the same band together. When we met them, they were in an all-female band called Mean Streak. It was it was like the one of the first all-female thrash metal bands out of New York. Yeah. And so we've all been friends. So the only thing that changed was we weren't making music together anymore. So when it came time to do my solo album, and I had written that music, and I was trying to decide on a drummer, and my wife and my kids were like, oh, you should get Mike to do it, and I'm like, that might be fun. And it was right at the start of the pandemic, and so one of the things that stops musicians from getting together is everyone's on different touring schedules, and everyone was home, and Mike was home. Like, hey, you want to do this? No problem. He got in his car and drove to New York, and it was a lot of fun. We spent about a week of him tracking the drums, and it was really just fun to reconnect in that way. And then we took it to the next level, doing Liquid Tension Experiment together, because in that case we were actually writing together, being creative together, making a record together, as we've done in the past, in that case with Tony Levin and Jordan. And it's nothing but smiles and good times and fun. It was really cool to reunite that way.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's got you can sense the good energy that you have in between, like the chemistry, like, and all these share that the chemistry is everything, right? Like, what else matters? But
the chemistry is everything. It actually is. And it's funny too, with my solo album, I had gone in, written all the music, recorded all the guitars, programmed drums, played bass, like it was all done. And then I had to go in and get Dave LaRue to play bass on it, and Mike to play drums on it. And when Mike started playing drums, I remember the first day he came into the studio and he just started playing to this music that I wrote. It just sounded like the two of us. It just was really nostalgic. Awesome. Even though we didn't write it together, we weren't jamming together, we weren't even in the same room when I was writing it, but there's just something about what you just said, that chemistry that creates this magical sound. And one of the things I thought was really awesome with the fans out there is when it came out, it just got such a positive reaction. Like, people were just like, I'm so happy that you did this, and the music sounds positive and happy. And this is like really all during the heart of the whole pandemic and everything. So it was a very good, positive, you know,
we need
thing
a
to
positive
come.
rock and roll story right now.
Yeah,
A positive rock and
exactly.
roll story is exactly what people need. But that
Totally,
chemistry
totally.
stuff is real. Like,
It's
well,
real.
lyrics and stuff. When did you start writing lyrics? Were you a kid? Like, and how do you fit this around playing so much guitar? When are you
Sure.
writing around all this guitar? Yeah.
Right, Well, I guess you can call it creative writing.
Yeah.
It was something that I was also really into.
Yeah.
Just as a teenager, writing stories and poems and things like that. I, so like you mentioned at the start, I was into painting, drawing, writing, music. So obviously I'm a creative type, if you want
Yep.
to typecast me. It just kind of naturally worked when I got into writing music. Okay,
Yeah.
well, there needs to be lyrics to these songs. And so I got into doing it, and I started doing that very young. When does it happen? It's funny because it's such a crucial and important part of songwriting, or is the lyrics and developing
Yeah.
that. And especially that I'm not the one singing them, so taking into consideration our vocalist and how he has to sing them. It takes time. I can give you an example with the new Dream Theater album. We always write the music first,
Yep.
and then the lyrics after. And I'm also producing the record at the same time. So there was a point where the music was done. Everybody was starting to track their parts.
Yep.
And I was done with the guitars, and bass was happening, and Jordan was doing his keyboards. And I'm like, okay, well, I have to write lyrics now. And so we did this record in our new headquarters, our new Dream Theater headquarters, and there's like a loft in the top, and I would go up there and escape and just bury myself in the music while Jordan was tracking it down below. And
Awesome.
I'd like need a break and grab a coffee and pop my head in as Mr. Producer and be like, how you guys doing? And then go back up. But it's a whole different, it almost uses different brain muscles than music writing, because you're it's also a creative aspect, but you're trying to send a message, tell a story, you're thinking about your vocalists, there's melodic concerns. And if it's done well, then the song comes across great. If it's done badly, then it could really set a listener off. You know what it's like when you hear a cheesy lyric or a cheesy vocal or a word that's just awkward. It's like, it almost makes you not want to listen to the song.
Just ruin the solo. You just ruined the solo with that.
Yeah,
part.
exactly. Yeah.
What is the strongest, what have been some of the strongest reactions to Dream Theater lyrics? Like people love it or hate it? Just out of interest. I'm sure, I have a feeling Dream Theater fans are quite strong-willed in their love and hate for you guys.
Yes.
I hate you guys, but things that, if you're really invested,
Right.
Yeah.
No, there is hate. There is hate.
Yeah.
For sure. No, Dream Theater fans are very passionate and very vocal, and and I think it's kind of like, I mean, I'm not going to say this is exclusive to us, because so many bands and so many band members I know and talk to experience the same thing. But people that are, when music is really dramatic and intense, every little detail of it matters. And sometimes a lyric in a song could reach somebody in a way that you never anticipated, that's like way more over the top and deep that you ever even thought of. And you just like, you get taken aback, and you're so humbled, like when somebody says a song like The Spirit Carries On, from scenes from, I played that at my father's funeral, and you're like blown away by these different emotional connections that people make to a lyric. Sometimes it's the opposite, where just people just they can't relate to what, they're like, why did you write about this cheesy subject or whatever. They'll have, like, there might be something that I'm really into, let's say it's something really nerdy and science fiction-ish, and I'll write a song about that, and then people like what the hell is this cheesy, I remember like on Systematic Chaos, I think that's what has In the Presence of Enemies, and I was writing stuff about the Dark Master and all this, and people are like, what do you, or another good example was a song called The Count of Tuscany, where I was telling a story about this experience I had, John Mayung and I had in Tuscany in Italy.
Yeah.
And I wrote this whole sort of fictional but real, based on reality song called The Count of Tuscany. And it ended up being a fan favorite, but I remember the original reaction was like, what the hell are you writing about? This is like the worst, cheesiest thing. What is this? But
because it can go so many places.
Yes,
Like the
exactly.
whole fantasy thing as well. Like, and
Yes.
I think it's really interesting because there's like, I feel like there's like two schools of thought. Like I've spoken to some like heavy metal guys and they're like into, they're like, oh, well, punk rock was speaking to a certain sort of thing and I couldn't connect with the fantasy of heavy metal anymore. And but then there's like other people who are like, no, I love that escapism. Like it's everything to kind of get into that. And yeah, do you feel that, do people reflect that back to you that the escapism is what they need?
They do.
Yeah,
they do. And you know, I kind of go by my own experience because I like that in media and movies and stuff like that. You know, it's like, I know, you know, both my daughters are actresses and they probably hate when I say stuff like this. You know, the dramas about real people's problems, like I don't want to watch. I'd rather watch Star Wars and things that are made up fantasy that lets me escape and be entertained. And you know, sometimes that stuff has a place, and when it's done well and done right, it could be so moving and such a great experience. And I have written songs about my real life tragedies and problems that people have related to, so I get it. So I'm not saying it's a blanket policy, but I do enjoy storytelling and that escapism. And I think I did that to the fullest of extent when we did The Astonishing, which was a story that I wrote, and then we turned it into this whole almost like a musical theater type of album. That freaked a lot of Dream Theater fans out. That was a good example of people saying, what the hell are you guys doing?
I think it's kind of fun that you get to do that though, and they stick it out. They stay with you. That's the thing. They wouldn't get so involved. They wouldn't have such strong opinions if they weren't so emotionally invested. You know,
exactly.
Like
I agree.
Any kind of a response is a response. And the new album, I like Awaken the Master. I feel like it sounds like at the beginning, like at the end of a bank robbery, like, and a really cool one where there's like 8 different people and they're all doing different stuff and they're like getting the part right, and then they're like toning this is weird, but you know, it kind of feels like that, and then they're in the car and then it becomes a whole different film later. And you know, the title track it feels like a whole movie, and it feels like something watching a protagonist heroically do that. Do you see anything visual when you're playing guitars and when you're doing all this stuff? Do you have a visual experience of it?
Absolutely. It's definitely part of it, and I think it's actually really important in what we were talking about before with music and lyrics and having that really go together. You know, you can take, for example, the title track, like you said, A View from the Top of the World. It's a 22-minute or so piece of music. You know, it's very soundtracky and sort of required a subject matter that was going to be fitting to that, to be able to tell during all that time and have the music reflect that. So when I'm listening to that song and it's so cinematic, the opening sounds like a Batman movie or something.
100%.
Choosing the subject that I wrote about, which is about what drives certain people to want to conquer seemingly impossible human feats, like scaling Everest or slacklining across canyons or wingsuit diving off of cliffs or deep sea, deep cave diving, all things that I would never do in a million years, but people are like so into that, risking their lives. And so that just sounded like such an epic topic that visually went with the way the music sounded. And when you do that right, it makes the song work.
That's pretty fun. You're kind of giving birth to an idea twice.
Like it is.
And then it's like a whole separate feeling. Like, how much?
That's why I enjoy. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
That's why I enjoy. Carry on.
That's why I enjoy the lyric part too, because it's just like you said, it's like second part to the creative process.
Who would be on? What are the 5 songs that changed your life?
5 songs that changed my life.
I keep dropping this on people, which is really, when I really should give you some time to think about it.
I,
But at the same
yeah, I
time,
mean,
it's more truthful in some ways to do it right off the cuff.
yeah, you know, I guess it's, you know, to me, I think about the formative years and like what made me make these sort of paradigm shifts in my
Yeah.
thinking as a young musician. You know, one was the first time I heard Rush, and I just was like, what, you know, I just fell in love with it, and got really into it, and subsequently got into the album Hemisphere. So the song Hemispheres was just one of these songs that just, you know, changed everything for me.
Yeah.
It opened everything up. Another one like that was Yes, Fragile.
Yeah.
Hearing you know, any song from Fragile, but probably Roundabout, because it was just played on the radio in New York,
Oh
and
my
just
God.
being like, what is this, you know, what is this? Like, I need to know what this is. I need to get into it. They're life-changing moments.
Did it feel like rock take it further? Did it feel like it had taken like rock further, like those kind of bands, like Prog, then like, you know, your Led Zeppelins or your, you know, did
It
it
did
sound
to
like
me,
another
yeah.
step? Like, how did you want to replicate it? Like, or not
Yeah.
replicate, but did you like, I want to be this nuts? Not like,
Right. Well, what it did for me is, you know, like I said, I started off kind of like just the normal kid, you know, in suburbia, playing guitar and trying to learn the music that was on the radio, to finding out like, this is something that I think I could do well. I want to get more into it. And then you start getting into other guitars, classical music, more complicated music. And then when you hear a band like Rush or Yes, where it's like, oh, you mean the song doesn't have to be 3.5 minutes, it could be 15 minutes, you know, and you have all these amazing players playing together in this way. It opened that whole thing up for me, where I was like, rock music could be done in another way. It
yeah,
doesn't have to be just all in 4/4 time. It doesn't have to be in this little box. It could be something more. So yeah, it made me want to do that. It made me want to, and a band like Iron Maiden, the way they would do that well with their big, I mean, as well with their big songs like Hallowed Be Thy Name or whatever, but they'd also be telling these stories at the same time. That was just like mind-blowing too, because I'm like, okay, so I could play songs that are 12, 15, 20 minutes long, have long solos, and also I get to write a story and sing about that, you know.
yeah,
It made me want to do that for
yeah.
sure.
Awesome. Do you ever hear 3-minute songs and go, that sounds half finished and I'd like to write the rest of it?
Yeah, that's funny.
Sorry, I've always on the upstream theater.
Right.
You're like, oh God, you really gave up really early.
Yeah.
Idea.
Yeah, you could have extended that.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing about that is there's a whole art to that as well.
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done. You know, it's like sometimes to do something well in that with that limitation is very, very difficult, you know.
Totally.
So I don't envy the guys writing that stuff. You know? Yeah.
Well, you can go let your freak flag fly, as they would.
Right, exactly.
If they say, okay, that's 3, we need 2 more songs.
You know, I would say as a guitar player, the first time I heard the Dregs, I don't know like how familiar you are with the Dixie Dregs and Steve Morse.
I'm not.
Yeah, so the Dregs are a bluegrass rock
Yeah, right.
kind of style band out of Miami. Steve Morse is the guitar player, and Steve is my favorite guitar player of all time. And he's actually in Deep Purple now, but
yeah, right.
Yeah. And so when I heard a friend, what's that?
No big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. So when a friend of mine who knew that I was kind of starting to get more and more into guitar playing, it was actually a drummer's like older brother's friend. You know, he would come in and of course be old enough to go to the bars and watch these different bands, and he's like, you got to listen to the Dregs. And I remember listening to a song called The Bash by the Dixie Dregs. It was a live version of this insane guitar chicken picking thing that just blew my mind. I was like, I need to know how to do that.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so that was a major and then the other one would be an album called Friday Night in San Francisco, which is Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin, Paco de Lucia, and it's just 3 acoustic guitar players playing at the Warfield in San Francisco, where Dream Theater's played many times, and just doing this insane acoustic shredding that again made me just say, like, I need to know how to do that. I got to practice more. This is the instrument I'm going to dedicate my life to.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many more, but those are the few I can think of off the top of my head.
That's a good list. We're building a monster playlist of everyone's five, so you can kind of do these like 5-song little
Nice.
epics, which is really interesting to kind of go deep into like these chapters of people's lives, because you know, no musician hasn't been transformed by music. What do you think guitarists get out of playing music that other instruments don't?
I've always said that it's specifically electric guitar is one of the most expressive instruments, because it's something that you could manipulate in a way, because it has strings that you could bend and tune and stuff. You could manipulate in a way that's just so reflective of your inner voice.
Yeah.
It's not to say that, you know, so much emotional music hasn't been played and written on piano, but when you think about a piano, you know, as you play the keys, they sound, as long as the piano's in tune, you know, it sounds like it sounds when you hit the key. If you think about guitar and think about young guitar players learning and why it sounds so not quite right and out of tune until they get the tactile feeling that you don't have to press so hard and you could kind of bend a note in or out of tune. And then, you know, on top of that, electric modern guitar with amplifiers and feedback and distortion and everything, you're just in this world where you could make this instrument really, really speak. And I think that, I know I'm biased, but I think that electric guitar is really the best. Yeah, that is the best instrument for you know, conveying that. And I think that's why so many people just are in love with guitar, and they, you know, it's like it's always something that just draws people in. You know, there's nothing like, you know, the guitar solo in Comfortably Numb, you know, David Gilmour just standing there playing that. There's no other instrument that does that for me.
This is true. You can it strikes an interesting chord. And I mean, you've put out a lot of this into the world, you know. Is there anything you really want to do you haven't done yet?
You mean like musically?
Yeah.
Or
What's some like nuts thing you haven't done yet that you want to do?
I'm not really sure. I think the last nuts thing that I did that was something that I really wanted to do, that was just this overwhelming project, was The Astonishing that I talked about before, because that was a situation where I had written a story. You know, we talked about storytelling as a kid. I finally wrote this whole story, and then Jordan and I went in and wrote the soundtrack to that story in the form of like a 2.5 hour, you know, Dream Theater musical almost, and then had it scored by David Campbell, who, you know, hired orchestras and marching bands and, you know, adult choirs and boys choirs and all these different things. And then I worked with a novelist named Peter O'Rourke, and he wrote a novel based on the story. And then we went on tour and put out this whole insane show with graphics to the entire thing. You know, it was literally the most all-encompassing musical creative thing I've ever done, that brought everything in line together that we've been talking about. So after I did that, it's kind of like gravy. I don't know, man, that's like it's smooth sailing from here on out, you know. So I just enjoy playing guitar and making music with my friends, you know. It sounds kind of corny, but
it's a pretty good life, man. Like the end of the day, and your 14-year-old self would probably be pretty stoked.
Absolutely.
Real, like your 14-year-old self, like, did you ever envision this as a kid? Like, did you ever dream about it coming out just like this? Or well,
the funny thing about you saying that is I literally dreamt about doing this. That's the reason I picked up guitars. I would have dreams of being on stage, like a reoccurring dream that I was on stage playing guitar, performing. I don't know why I didn't play guitar. Yeah. And so, you know, the thing, and like I said, I was very sort of single-minded, like that this was the thing I wanted to do with my life, but I never would have envisioned that it would be at the level that it is and has been. And
Yeah.
you know, there are so many musicians in the world and so many guitar players that have a shot and an opportunity
Yeah.
to turn it into a career and be successful. I mean, it's something I'm so thankful for.
It's
you know?
pretty, I'm always thrilled to see good people go forth and do that. You know, we talked to John 5 recently, and he had a similar attitude. He's just like, I just love guitar, just
exactly
obsessed with guitar. That's just my life, and that's Okay, here's some random questions. Let's throw in some random questions as we roll out. If a crystal ball could tell you the truth about yourself, your life, the future, or anything else, what would you want to know?
What would I want to know?
That is a random question. I'm not gonna lie.
That is very random.
Extremely random.
You know, I think that one of the things for me that in wanting to do this as a career that you don't sort of anticipate at the time is what your adult life is going to be once you start to do the things like find your wife and have kids and start a family and stuff, and then how challenging that's going to be to kind of make the two things work, where you're out on tour and, you know, raising a family and everything. And it's like the crystal ball to look into, like, you know, knowing like how all this time is so valuable and that all these experiences are so valuable while you're trying to make this happen. I mean, that would have been nice to know and to see, you know. And thankfully, you know, in my case with my wife Raina, you know, she is a musician herself. Like I said, she's a guitar player, and there couldn't be more of a relationship and family that's just bound by music and by art. And you know, we couldn't have done it any other way. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if a crystal ball would have changed anything, but
you're doing pretty well, bro.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's something you don't you just don't think of that when you're 17.
Focus on the moment.
Yeah.
When was the last time you sang to yourself or to someone else? These are maybe too random.
It's pretty random. I'm like,
it's pretty random, yeah.
I should really know the answer to this.
It's okay.
Because we kind of do this all the time in my house.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. A couple days ago, I'm gonna make something up.
Yeah. Do you guys sing to each other?
You know what? We
awesome.
we sing. If you know, it's funny. What was the latest thing we did? Actually, it's funny because we talked about Boston before, and this wasn't the other day or anything, but it was a car ride home, and my wife and I got on this Boston kick, and we were singing like every Boston song. Somehow we knew like all the lyrics.
Of course.
That was fun.
They're bangers. They really are. Yeah.
We've gone on some good John Denver sing-alongs as well.
Yeah.
So
Get in it.
You never know what's going to happen.
It's you know, there's some beautiful ass music that's happened. Who would be on your musical Mount Rushmore?
How many heads are on Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, I think
4?
5.
5?
Or you can have 4 if you want. I'm kind of pushing it.
I should know. I should know this. I should know.
I mean, you should probably know it better than me, really.
I should, exactly. I feel embarrassed that I asked that question. You know, for me, Peter Gabriel would be up there.
Yeah, right. For
sure. Yeah, one of my favorite artists of all time. It would probably be Stevie Ray Vaughan, one of my favorite guitar players of all time. You know, probably James Hetfield, because I think to me, when I heard Metallica, it kind of like, I knew, even though I was playing Prog, I knew what like the sound I wanted. I was just like in love with that sound of metal. The Sound of Metal is a movie, right?
Yeah, it is. And Metallica what was it like, Metallica breaking in that world and at that time? Because there were you had a really, really huge live music scene. I remember I watched the thing with the guy from Public Enemy talking about how Anthrax would play to 3,000 people a weekend just at local shows, and we were like, far out. I want to be a part of that. Like,
oh yeah, it was intense, you know. And actually at the time, I had just gone to Berkeley with John Myung. We were 17, 18 years old, and we met Mike Portnoy, as I said, and the Metallica Master of Puppets came out 80, I believe, the spring of 86. So that was like within our first year. We only went to Berkeley for 1 year and then we left. We were dropouts.
Yeah.
So when I remember listening to that and just being like, oh my God, this is insane. And just being so influential. But yeah, that was that period of time. I was talking about this recently. Was talking about U2 and even that and even Rush, and the time period from the early 80s through the early 90s, like that sort of 10-year span.
Yep.
And it was just such an unbelievable time for music from me. You know, I know there's certain time periods that people swear by in the 60s and 70s, and it's just so true. But that period from, 80, 81 through 92, just an insane amount of music that was so influential.
I wonder why that was. I wonder why it was such a peak time.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's funny because stylistically, if you think about rock and roll, it's not really that old of a music form. You think about maybe the 50s, if you want to talk about the birth of rock and roll. 50s, 60s, you had a certain sound. 70s, and then the 80s were like, it's only like a few decades removed from the birth of it. So it's like all this stuff started to kind of converge.
Yeah.
And I think the world became smaller, and so then you had a lot of international bands and things. And to me, the sound started to mix a bit more.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just about having like these progressive bands from the UK or like disco bands or whatever, but all of a sudden it was like that, but mixed with hard rock and metal and punk, and just making all this stuff happen. It kind of seemed to explode.
Yeah, it happened before I got to enjoy it, but I'm glad it happened. It's great now being, enjoying it. But what was, just random, just made me think of it. What was your first really strange experience on an international tour with Dream Theater, where you're like, oh my God, we're in a completely different culture and they're responding to what we're doing?
Right. Well, that happens a lot. It's especially the first time, you've gone to a country. A couple have come to mind.
Yeah.
I'll name two for you, and they're kind of the opposite sort of experiences. One of them is the first time that Dream Theater played in Rome, Italy. Now when we first went to, as an American band going to Europe, it was all new to us, obviously. Yeah. And there's certain countries that we went to for the first time, like France, Germany, Italy, Holland, that we still continue to go today and have such a huge, dedicated, strong fan base. And Italy became one of these amazing places for us.
Awesome.
But the first time playing in Rome, I remember playing, and it was in support of Images and Words. And I remember that the people in the audience were singing louder than the music. Like, it sounds like something the Beatles would experience, right? But I never had that. Like, I never played a show and had people sing back like they were singing the guitar melodies. They were singing the instrumental parts, and it was just so wild and like just an unbelievable experience, because there's just like this big emotional wave of connection that happens in certain countries. And Italy is just like unlike no other place. And I also remember the opposite thing happened, where the first time we played in Japan, where while we're playing the music, the Japanese audience is like totally animated, totally into it, singing along, smiling, dancing, jumping up and down. And then you'd end the song and the applause would end really abruptly, and then there'd be silence. Or like right before we go on stage, and the concerts would always be early in Japan. They still are. Like, you'd play 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock.
Yeah, right.
And you'd be at the venue and you're backstage and it's dead quiet, and you're like, did anybody come to the show? Is anybody going to be in the audience? And you step on stage and it's sold out, unbelievable. amount of people. So it's a different, that cultural thing was so unique of an experience for us as an American band going, to Asia and playing specifically in Japan. It was pretty wild. And again, we developed this relationship with our Japanese fans. It's so special and has been so long lived from the first time we went there, and we keep going back. And we got to play, just such iconic places like the Budokan and stuff like that. And it's been amazing.
That's great. Well, I mean, okay, what's been the weirdest experience where you've discovered someone you really respected is a fan of yours?
It's a fan of mine.
Yeah.
Let me think about that one.
Yeah. Dun, 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 dun.
Somebody that I was, so another musician or something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
That was a fan of mine.
Well, yeah.
This was a funny. Okay, this was a funny thing. This wasn't. This is a little more in like the less expected. Not a musician, but one time we played in Utah, in the U.S.
Yep.
And the governor was a tremendous Dream Theater fan, and you would not expect it. And he actually named a day. There's a Dream Theater Day in the state of Utah. And I thought that was so bizarre.
This has been a great deal. That's wonderful.
Yeah, that was awesome. And he ended up running for president at one point. And I remember seeing him on the, stage, like debating the other candidate.
Yeah.
Like, that guy's a Dream Theater. You might not know it, but that guy,
you could
that
bring
governor
it to the
from
world and be a beautiful thing. Well,
you never know who's going to be a Prog fan out there.
No, it's all very, and you changed. I was talking to Misha from Periphery, and I know you got a family connection with Periphery, but he's just like, when I heard Dream Theater, I was like, oh, we can do anything. We can put anything there. There's no rules. We can just go.
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. Did you feel like that? Did you feel like there were rules?
No, I didn't. In fact, that same thing that Misha said is what I felt when I heard Yes, or bands like that. Like, oh, I don't have to stick to this formula, these songs can go on, could be. One of the things I loved, and Dream Theater does this too, that Rush did, was the songs had parts to them, like part one, part two. I'm like, that is so cool. Like, I could actually, it's like these songs could be little movies.
Yeah, totally.
So yes, I totally felt like, in fact, to me, that is one of the key components to progressive music, calling something what is prog, and it's kind of like that there aren't any rules. They kind of all go out the window. The world is a great movement
to be a part of. What a great movement to be a part of.
Absolutely.
May it go forth forever. It probably will. Like,
I'm sure in all different and Periphery is a great example of just the continuation of this big family tree of Prog. And you think about the bands that came before Dream Theater that we listened to and that we were into, and then bands listened to us, and then it influenced them, and then came these other bands, Periphery, and now bands are listening to them, and that's different. And it's just huge, like awesome family tree of Prog.
Yeah, it all goes back to these majestic bands of the 70s and prior to that. It's cool. Well, great. Well, thanks for being a part of our show today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
I love going into people's worlds. It's cool. It's good to get deep with it. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and from the mountains of Norway.
Yes. So you guys check out the new Dream Theater album is out in October
22nd. It comes out. I'm assuming it's the same release date worldwide. So hopefully in Australia that I didn't mess that up, and it'll be October 22nd.
I think it's global. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's global, and we're excited about it, and even more excited about getting back out there. The world needs live music. We all need it as performers and as fans. Like you said, this is fan first, right? We're all fans, and it's like there's nothing like that experience, and we can't wait to get back.